Hi everyone, thanks for joining me on this episode of The Art of Action Figures. I'm very excited to be talking about one of my favorite, well, let's be honest, my favorite new action figure line of 2023 and several years prior. If you go back, I think this is one of the most exciting things that's come out of action figure collecting world in my recent memory, and that is the Jada Toys Street Fighter 2 6-inch scale action figure line. On this show, I like to talk about my experience as a collector of action figures through kind of an artist lens. I bought this for my collection, so obviously I want to like it. I do like it. I think that for a relatively new challenger, let's say, on the action figure market, Jada is really making very quick progress and, in fact, outperforming a lot of other brands in this price range. So if you're not familiar with Jada, they aren't, as of yet, a household name in action figure world, but I think they are becoming that more and more, thanks in large part to this line of figures, but also some other products that they're developing. Lately, their Mega Man line looks really promising. They've had some attention-grabbing food mascots, but not necessarily something I'm interested in collecting. But Street Fighter and Capcom brands in general are definitely a big nostalgia hit for me. Lately, I've been playing a lot of Street Fighter 6, thanks in large part to this action figure line reminding me that that whole world exists, but also just the reception of that game has been really phenomenal. So I'm glad they're doing this at this time. I don't know if that was planned to coincide with the release of what seems like it's been the most successful Street Fighter game in the last 3 or 4, or at least, let's say 3 titles maybe. So, good timing either way. And let's see, I think that's enough preamble. Let's talk about Ryu. I've made a couple of modifications to Ryu, which I'll talk about. And overall, just looking at the presentation, the packaging here is fantastic. You've got your Street Fighter health bar across the top. The sprite from the character select screen is shown here, and if you've followed any of the press or interviews with Jun, who's the lead of Jada's action figure division, he has said that the primary head sculpt that the figures will come wearing, at least for like their first color variants, will all be based on their select screen appearance, which if we flip the box around, we get the whole lineup of what they're aiming to do, which is complete the Street Fighter 2, I'm assuming Ultra Street Fighter 2 Final Challengers roster. I don't really know. So there's like so many versions of Street Fighter 2. There's Street Fighter 2, there's Street Fighter 2 Ultra, Turbo, and then Ultra Final Challengers. I don't really know all the differences, but this is the lineup that they're going for, I think. Obviously, Fei Long is already out. Chun-Li is coming soon. Let's see. And then already announced are Ken coming in Wave 2. Presumably, shoot, I can't think of Ken's evil name, but I'm assuming since Evil Ryu is a Comic-Con exclusive this year, it makes sense for Violent Ken, that's it, to be one maybe in a subsequent year. Let's see, skipping over a few, they haven't talked about these big boys yet, but we have seen a prototype of Guile at this year's Comic-Con. We also have seen Dalcian from Wave 2. Cammy was also announced as part of Wave 3. T-Hawk, they haven't mentioned. Fei Long is here already. DJ, they also announced as part of Wave 3, which is fantastic. Balrog, or Boxer, whatever you want to call him, hasn't been talked about, nor is Vega, or Sagat, or Akuma. And then M. Bison, Vega, whatever, no, is he Balrog? Dictator, I don't know. This guy with the hat is part of Wave 2 as well. I'm really looking forward to him. He's probably the first, like, oversized or larger sized character that they'll be coming out with in the near future. Taking a look at the box, overall, I think the arcade cabinet inspired shape is a clever idea. Personally, I honestly, this is kind of a silly thing, but I store my figure boxes with the spines out. I do love this little detail with the character name and their fighting style described on the side. It would be really nice to have a portrait of the character in the box, but they, for now, have just been running with some common art that's the same across all the figures. See, you can see Ryu and Fei Long, but then there's Cammy, and then if I bring out another box, this is Fei Long, and it's exactly the same. Same on the other side, except now it says Fei Long and Fei Long's fighting style. So some character-specific portraits on the sides would be really cool. And then the silly thing for me is when I display these on the side, I'm not crazy about the space that's in here, but I mean, that's a me being weird thing, not a like fault of theirs. I think most people, if you're displaying these boxes, a lot of people are going to just have them front facing like that, and that's cool. Let's see, get out of here, Fei Long, and we'll just focus on Ryu today. You can see these are designed for 13 plus. I'll talk a little bit about what that means in an upcoming video where I'm going to be looking at Marvel Legends VHS X-Men figures. Extra warning, if you are under 3 years, this has small parts that present a choking hazard, so careful of that. And I think that's everything with the box. So let's go ahead and crack this open. Now, I've already opened this. Like I said, I've made modifications to this Ryu figure. I usually open my figures from the bottom since it's least visible, if that's an option. So bottom of the box, not too exciting, usually has some legal stuff. There's a customer support line, which I've heard has been really good from people who've had to use it. I have not. Top of the box is just a little window for some light to get in, so if you're displaying the figure, you can see it inside the box. Okay, so opening this at the bottom, we have a couple layers of cardboard here, and then we have a plastic tray, which, you know, you'd probably have a hard time getting out of the top, so I think these are probably designed to be opened at the bottom, given the height of that tray. All right. And then I'm going to set the tray aside just for a second, because there's one more detail with the packaging created, but I think the figures are just so exciting, people haven't really paid as much mind to this, but they come with this really nice, like, pixel art background print that frames the figure in the box, or you can take it out and use it for display. It's a little bit trimmed along the sides just to fit in the packaging, and maybe if they had just a pure box-shaped package, it wouldn't have that problem. No, I'm just kidding. But I am guessing this is a stage from the game. I don't know if it's a Ryu-specific stage, but Fei Long's is different, so I'm assuming these are character dependent. And this has this, like, really beautiful, I don't know, Japanese temple style with this pixel moon and these rooftops here. Really nice. It's just cardboard, but it is printed very cleanly and clearly. I mean, it's pixel art, so advantage as far as printing, but they did nice work there, and I don't know if people were really expecting that. It's a nice touch for sure. So taking a look at Ryu in the tray, he has a Hadouken effect, an alternate sort of angrier looking face figure himself, obviously. And then this little squiggle here is a peg stand that plugs into this base, and that's to support the Hadouken. And then he has alternate Hadouken hands and fists that he is wearing. One thing to note, taking this in and out of the packaging is a little tricky because his headband has to go through these little holes, and that can be kind of a fuss. So I don't know if I'll be doing reboxing, unboxing so much with this figure, just to avoid any risk of tearing that. It is a soft rubbery plastic, and it's great because that gives range of motion, but it also means it's more susceptible to being torn if it snags on this little hole. So I'm going to do this very carefully. I'm going to pop the head first, just to be sure there's no risk, and then I'll pull the rest of the figure out, and we'll look at him. All right, so I've mentioned Jada's doing a lot of things really impressive for figures of this price, but really almost of any price to content ratio. They are really, really good value. Alternate face expression, alternate hands, and effect part is really kind of the trifecta of accessories you would want in, let's say, like an action game action figure. Not to mention that these are some of the most articulated figures that I own. And I own quite a few import figures, which we'll take a look at some of as we go through this and talk about the articulation on this guy. But they are definitely coming out of the gate really strong. There's definitely some things I think they can improve, and I am confident that they will. I've listened to some interviews with June, the product lead, like I said, and he sounds like he is really passionate about constantly improving and making these figures as good as they can be. It seems like a bit of a love letter to Street Fighter for him, so that is fantastic for collectors and fans of this franchise, and so on and so on. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is, just to get it out of the way, I have repainted Ryu's hair. And I'll pause here just for a second. The reason I repainted it was the original paint was starting to rub off. I have some pictures, which I will try to edit in at this part. But his hair out of the box was a much darker brown, and I think was maybe a little bit darker than the in-game likeness would suggest. Now, my repaint isn't perfect either. I kind of just used whatever brown paint I have on hand. It comes out a little more grayish, bluish brown versus like a more reddish brown. If we take the packaging back over here, you can see the color difference in the hair. You can see it's more reddish brown on the box. Also, let's look at this face in profile and talk about it for a moment. Or we've got 3/4, not profile. Sorry about that. I think overall, my main critiques to offer on the likeness are the hair sculpt is maybe a little bit chunky. It could be more feathered, like on the packaging, but that might not be possible with the materials. His nose looks a little short, it's pointier here, I think. I think he's obviously looking to the left in the sprite, so maybe this figure is just looking straight ahead. That might be some of the difference that we see here. And then the kind of elephant in the room is I think his skin tone is not quite right. It is a little bit more orange than more pinkish on the box and in the game sprites. I think overall it's not bad. I can see what they're going for with the eyebrows over the headband, and I think that's great. The chin and jaw is maybe a little wide, but I think the overall like chunkiness of the jaw is not too bad. The mouth and the expression are really close. I think it's the likeness, the things that are throwing it the most, I think, are the nose and the jawline. But it's really not bad. You obviously, just looking at this, would say, yeah, that's Ryu. But I think it's something they'll keep improving as they get better and better with sculpts. Some people have been saying this doesn't really look like Ryu, especially not Street Fighter 2. So one of the things I was also going to discuss is similarly with Fei Long. Fei Long has like more of a trim physique in Street Fighter 2. I think, and it might just be for practical reasons and probably not licensing reasons or anything, but I think the figures are taking a little bit of design inspiration from Street Fighter 4 as well. And part of that, like I said, might be just practical, because part of the job they have to do here is translate the character designs, which in Street Fighter 2 are two-dimensional sprites, into three-dimensional sculpts to mold in plastic. So I think Street Fighter 4 is the first, or maybe just the most readily available Street Fighter with 3D character assets. Overall, I think they've done a nice job with the capturing the essence of the character. It's not spot-on likeness, and I think they'll keep improving that. While we're on the subject, let's just take a look at this alternate head. And here he's got more of an angry expression. His headband is swept to one side. I think the nose is better on this one. I don't know if that's just the expression or if it really is that different, but let's see. I think it has maybe more of a scrunchy point to it, which I think is accurate for Ryu. I think this one is just a little short and squat in the nose, versus this one has more of a pointy nose. Ryu is, in my mind, Ryu has very sharp, angular features. So this one, I've heard more people say this one looks strange, but I think this one might be. I mean, obviously he looks a little like strained in the mouth, but like you probably would be too if you were doing whatever he's doing here. And strained faces aren't always super attractive, so it's kind of reasonable that it looks a little strained, but I think it looks like appropriately tense, and I like that. Sometimes you get gritting teeth or yelling faces and they just look like a face with the mouth open, and this one, everything is selling the tension in his attack or his taking damage or whatever. His eyebrows, you can see they're closer closer together over the bridge of the nose. There's even some little wrinkles in there where they are being scrunched a little bit, and that is really nice. Obviously, like, if you are showing this much tension, your eyebrows are going to be really really tensed. Everything about this face is tensed. The nostrils are spread, and I think that helps sell the pointiness in the nose. The mouth is not just gritting its teeth, it's straining the lower lip, you can see. And yeah, I think this is actually an excellent head sculpt. Again, likeness, I think they'll keep working on it, but this one I think gets closer. I would love to see maybe a little bit more variation in the hair. I think this is the same hair on both heads. Yeah. And again, I've painted this a lighter brown. The original is a darker brown, almost black, more the color of the eyebrows. I've left the eyebrows because, one, it takes a steadier hand than mine to do those and not mess them up, and two, I think it looks okay as it is. But that's just me. But yeah, I do have a little bit of a paint splotch on the cheek. That might have been from me, so I'm not going to hold that against anyone. Little paint splotches here and there to be expected on mass-produced painted action figures, so it's not the end of the world, from my collection at least. But yeah, okay. Pretty pleased with that face. Let's talk some more about the figure itself and get down to business with some articulation. Now, plenty of figure videos, reviewers out there going head to toe, top to bottom, every single joint, how much it moves, how far. I'm not going to go through all of that. I just want to hit sort of the highlights. And maybe highlight some of the places I think they can improve. Let's start with the things I think they can improve, and then we'll talk about all the good stuff. Okay? There's really only, let's say, 3, maybe 4 things I would like to see them do a little bit differently. The first, you could maybe call this one thing or two, but the hinges at the knees and the elbows, they are this kind of clicky, and they're quite tight. Not only that, they don't have the most natural looking bend. I definitely prefer the range, so I'm glad they've gone with that approach, but maybe that's something they can refine a little bit. To get the range, you have some pretty big cuts taken out of the arm there, but that's, like I said, I prefer the range, so definitely keep doing that if that's the best way to do it. The clickiness in the joints, it's not my favorite. It just makes posing a little bit more tenuous, as you kind of have to apply a lot of pressure, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. Especially with one hand. 2 hands, it's all right, but I know this is kind of standard for American figure design. I have a couple of figures here that I want to pull in to compare. Real quick, I'm just going to talk about the knees. They're similar, and I think it's another thing they can improve. If you fully articulate the knee, again, it doesn't create the cleanest angle there. I think a little sharper knee sculpt, I don't really know how you would achieve that, but that's something maybe to look for. And again, pretty deep cuts out of the back of the legs, but totally fine with me. I love that you can kick almost 180 degrees back, really maximizing the range. is something they're doing a great job with. Okay, so that was maybe 1 point, we'll call it. Second point, the feet are really nicely articulated themselves at the ankles, and we'll talk about that in the good stuff, but some toe joints would go a long way for some more dynamic action poses. And I don't really know why we have accepted alternate hands, but not really alternate feet. I don't know if it's just not feasible to engineer alternate feet, whether that's more or less difficult than a toe hinge. I'm not sure, but alternate feet provides you even more options than a toe hinge. You could have a foot that's curled, a foot that's got the toes curled down, a foot with the toes curled up. And none of them have to be articulated, similar to not having articulated fingers, which I think we all decided was a bad idea, right? So, I don't know. Let's see. That's 2. Point 3. The butterfly joints, while they work really, really well, they are the more limited style of butterfly joint. And I'll talk about what I mean by that when I bring out the other lines to compare to. But you can see they work pretty well. They are hindered a little bit by the gi here. But I mean, you can work around it. If you pull the gi in and then pull the arm across, you can get a little bit, you can get closer to the maximum range. Obviously, these joints have a maximum range that's defined by how deep that cut goes into the chest. Any more movement than that, and the arm just runs into the chest. But these work pretty well. I think the 2 things that I would improve, and this gets me to my 4th point, the style, it allows for range going forward and range going backwards, which I find the best way to show range going backwards is bringing the arms or hands together across the back. This is something you cannot do if you don't have backward butterfly joint. But there's actually more shoulder range of motion that you might desire. For example, putting his hands together over his head. And that's something that this type of joint doesn't allow, because the hinge only goes forward and back. So, I don't know if it's super essential for Ryu to do that, but depending on the pose you want to achieve, you might want to. So that's one thing to think about with the butterfly joints. And then the soft gi is the last thing I want to talk about, is kind of a negative for me. Let's not call it a negative. It's just something that I'm not really used to, and I find it a little bit frustrating to move the torso under the gi. It tends to like ride up on the torso itself or get out of position, and you have to shift it, and then you've moved the joint. And I just like to really be able to like precisely feel the joint that I'm moving, and this is something getting in between me and doing that. So I'm not sure there's a better way to do it. You could put a cut, but then you've got torso in 4 pieces, and so I don't know if that's really reasonable, and it might not be removable. I do like that this is designed to be removable, although I don't really have much need for Ryu without his gi. But I think the Figuarts Ryu has gone worst of both worlds, where it's both the overlay and it's not removable. So this is definitely at least taking advantage of what's the design decision once it's been made. And so let's go ahead and strip him down, and we can get a better look at those shoulder joints and the torso range. So without the gi, he can get his hands together in front, and this is really critical, obviously, for Ryu, especially this figure, as he comes with the Hadoken effect. I'll throw that together at the end with the gi and the alternate head and show you just how to set that up. But meanwhile, let's take a look at the torso. The shoulders here, like I was saying, they are this like hinge socket style butterfly joint. I don't really know why these are called butterfly joints. I think it's because they act like wings on the butterfly, but like lots of things have wings. So I don't really know what's special about butterflies. But yeah, you can see without the gi, he gets the full range across the front and the full range across the back. If you're watching a review and they say, and they're trying to demonstrate the butterfly range and they're not doing this, I would take whatever they're saying with a grain of salt, because like has butterfly joint that does that isn't really telling you much, because a lot of butterfly joints on figures I see, like they go from there to there, and that's just unnecessary. That is what you want with a butterfly joint. You want the hands in front of the chest or further. And so Jada has not made that mistake. They've done it really, really well with what it is. So I'm happy about that. Let's see. As far as how these could be better, I think they have a bit of a squarish look to them. I don't know if it's just in the shoulders, if it's maybe the traps being a little flat. And this is probably just the figure's designed to primarily be wearing the gi, so maybe this is a critique that doesn't really need to happen. But I think if I bring out Fei Long and compare, let's see. Uh-oh. Yeah, you can see Fei Long has more rounded traps. But he does still have the similar, more rounded traps, and he has more of a tapered obliques, whereas Ryu has more width in the lower abdomen section. These are very different sculpts. It's kind of surprising. The upper torso is similar. It's not identical, but the lower torso is very different. Anyhow, so something about these shoulders that I think is like a really, really minor feedback that could be improved over time. Like I said, the torso on Ryu especially has kind of a boxy profile, or not profile, silhouette. The boxy silhouette, I think, is partly due to the traps being a little bit flatter than Fei Long, but also you notice these the hinge piece for the shoulder joint is like straight vertical. Even Fei Long has a little bit of a curve. I'm going to try to get these in as neutral of a position as I can, just so you can follow what I'm talking about. But it really helps to look at them from the top. You can see Fei Long has just a very subtle curve. If you're looking at the top of that shoulder hinge, I need a pointer of some kind. If only I had a finger. Okay, there we go. This curve right here. And that means that along the front, it has kind of a bit of a curve, just a really subtle curve there. You see that? I'll try to really emphasize it with an effect if I can, but compare that to Ryu here. He has it a little bit in front and back, and you look at him from the front, that just looks like a vertical line to me. And I think this is where I'm going to bring in some comparisons. So I mentioned I'll be taking a look at the VHS X-Men figures. So here's Cyclops for your Marvel vs. Capcom scale. Cyclops is on a very commonly used Marvel Legends body, so that should give you an idea how Ryu will scale. Next to him, he's a little short compared to Cyclops, which is appropriate. I think Cyclops is a fairly tall fella. Ryu's... I don't really know Ryu's exact height, but I don't think he's particularly tall, so I think that scale works. But you can see Cyclops has a similar cut to Fei Long, where there's just a very subtle curve there. Sorry, let me align these. And that curve, basically, it's enough to continue the illusion of a shoulder. And what I mean by that is nobody has a vertical line between their shoulder and their torso. Really, like what you would see is something more like that, where the pectoral muscle is running straight into the shoulder in a curved shape. And so the shoulder is more of a ball. And so it looks fairly segmented when the ball has a flush line cut down the side of it. Versus here, it's not perfectly round, obviously. Like, there's still a cut, but the cut is rounded somewhat. Whereas in Ryu's case, you see the difference? Okay. So I was talking about those clicky hinge joints. Cyclops has very similar style of joint. Good range, similar range, so that's nice. This isn't a Cyclops review though. So keep a lookout for my X-Men VHS episode. I'll also be pitting Cyclops here against his import counterpart. We have the Mafex Gimli Cyclops. And this is where I wanted to demonstrate. Sorry, give me a second. My foot is stuck to my light's power cable. Okay. Now, the Gimli, Mafex Cyclops, and Marvel Legends Cyclops are also going to be going head-to-head in an upcoming video. Probably that'll be a follow-up to the VHS episode. So, we were talking about the Ryu shoulder joint, and it's very similar implementation to Marvel Legends. This Cyclops, I've modified the shoulder to maximize the range. The Vulcan body that this is using has a common issue with the range being limited due to the way that the shoulder is pegged into the torso or into this hinge socket. But I have modified it so he gets the maximum range, meaning he can bring his arm straight into the cut, and he actually gets really good range after doing that modification. But what he still can't do is touch his hands over his head. He's ready for the Y. But sometimes you need a pose. Can they A pose? That's going to be the way I talk about it. So how is Mafex doing that? Let me explain the best I can. So this is the next level of shoulder engineering as far as I'm concerned. I'm not sure it can get better than this. I think Figuarts has adopted a very similar style joint, which I am very pleased with, and I would love to see Jada, Marvel Legends, and Hasbro incorporate this as well. Before I talk about that in great detail, I mentioned the clicky hinges on Cyclops and Ryu here. The other really nice thing about the import figures is just the way they do their hinge joints. They are not the same material as these arm pieces, and I don't know if there's some kind of like gasket. The Figuarts joints used to have a metal gasket around the pin, and it acts kind of like a ball bearing, and it's just so smooth. Look at that. If I tried to bend this Cyclops' arm like this, it would not have straightened. It would have just spun around. In fact, when I show, don't tell. So I'm going to try to straighten his arm just like I did the Mafex, and there it goes. So that's the difference in smoothness. So hinges, same on the knees. Let's see, legs, you can sometimes see the little metal piece, but no, I can't. I don't know if Mafex uses a metal piece actually. So what they're doing in the shoulder here is worth talking about too, because I think this is something I want to see standardized. I think this is the best way to do shoulder joints until somebody comes up with a different one. And the way it works is this piece, let's call that the shoulder socket, the torso, and then the shoulder itself. The shoulder socket is on a ball peg going down into the side of the torso. I'll try to do a drawing to demonstrate what exactly I mean. But basically what that means is you get not only swivel from the ball peg, and the swivel achieves the same function as the hinge, but with a single connection point instead of two connection points. And what removing that second connection point allows is you actually get tilt on that ball, and so you can slightly pop the sockets out on some Mafex figures and Figuarts figures. It's better than others, but you can also tilt it in, and that is really the difference here. That is what's allowing him to A pose. It's mimicking the compression of the top of your shoulder when you raise your arm up, and it also lets him do things like shrug and say, "Oh, that Wolverine, I just don't understand him." You know, obviously you want to swap the hands, but you get the idea. So that is the difference. That is something I really hope that more figure lines adopt. Let's see. Just to demonstrate it again, and then here's going forward. So we've got hands touching in front. hands crossing him back. And the gold standard, hands touching up top. All right, back to Ryu here. Things he's doing incredibly well with. I think he's actually beating Mafex in hips. There is no drop down hinge for the hip to leg joint. Thank goodness. I cannot stand the drop hinges. So, real quick, I was gushing over Mafex. I'm going to discuss one of my least favorite things, and that is this action. This does almost nothing except make the figure completely unstable. So, not completely, but much more unstable than it would be with a nice fixed ball peg like Ryu. Or even like Vulcan, Cyclops. So, another little ding on Mafex with respect to Jada here. They've done a very nice thigh swivel. It's obviously there's a line in the sculpt, which some people just cannot stomach, but for me, it's necessary to get the posing. Your legs can rotate. Cyclops here, his legs do not rotate. Not even at the strap, where it would make total sense to put a cut. Nope. He gets that much thigh swivel. And it's all just up here in the ball. So, that's probably my biggest complaint with Mafex figures, is the way they do their hips. I do not like drop hips. I don't want to see them on anything. And I think Jada has done it excellently. But yeah, so thigh swivel, I mean, it's such a basic joint. I don't really get why some people don't tolerate it while they tolerate like something like that, or an elbow hinge. People don't have hinges in their elbows. Well, they do, but they don't look like that. Let's see. Other things he does well. I mean, the splits, perfect. That's just down to like really nice precision placement of that ball and shaping of this upper leg. So great job with that. This is also a soft diaper piece, and it matches color really well. It's a similar material to the gi. And so that actually gives him maybe a little bit more range than if it wasn't soft, because like you can see how nicely that is hidden. Like that looks, the silhouette, if you turn the lights down here, it's pretty seamless there. And to achieve that seamless look, you would either sacrifice a ton of range, or if you have a soft hip, see how it's flexing out of the way, and you can even hear it when I do it. So let's do it one more time. Hear that? And so that's really nice. It does the same going forward as well. So you can see there's some, I think there is some sort of like harder plastic inner part, and then just the outer part that forms like the shape of the waist is this soft material. And so it does allow him to kick forward, and you can see it's shifting a little bit when I do that. So watch. Nope, we'll do it from this side, because then you can actually see what I'm doing. All right. See how this is just deforming a little bit? And that's a good thing. You want that soft piece to deform and get the heck out of the way of my awesome... What's that? I don't know what he calls it. Spinning kick. Spinning bird kick. That's it, right? So... yeah, great hips. I mean, perfect hips. A lot of people... So my primary line that I collect is Figuart's Dragon Ball line. Recently, they have started putting butt flap sculpt on the back of the hips, and everybody has lost their absolute minds over it, and I do not understand it. It is industry standard to put a butt sculpt on the back. Nobody can kick their leg straight back through their butt. I'm sorry. Like, legs don't work like that. This is completely acceptable to me. And if you want him to do the full front back split, yes, he can't do it with his hips facing straight directly forward. But if you rotate his hips just slightly, okay, let's see. We're going to fake it. Okay, see it? His arms show the angle of his body, and his hips are rotated 45 degrees, and he's got perfect front back split. That works for me. So, yeah, hips, fantastic. Next piece of articulation that they get a lot of praise for. I mean, I said I wasn't going to do the whole thing. I'm basically doing the whole thing. The torso has maybe the best torso range of any figure in recent memory. Look at that back range. Look at the line. That's the top of his hips. Look at him. He's almost 90 degrees back. And it looks great. It doesn't look like he's bent at a 90-degree angle with like a kink. Like... And Cyclops here can't really do it because the strap and belt get in the way. So, not a great example. But you can see how hard that angle is, and he's not even bending that far. Look at how nice and natural that looks. You get a little bit of a gap, but like, I don't care. Bring on the gaps. If you can do this, and again, this one, you get some, going forward, you get a little bit more deformation of the back. But look, this here, that's the angle he's able to bend. That's 70 degrees. I don't know. Something like that. That's great. But there you go. I mean, that is one of the best torsos in the game. And not only does it have incredible front back range, you have very respectable side range as well, 45 degrees. Priority goes to range over gaps. So, at least for me. And yeah, I'm really pleased with that. So, great articulation setup. Okay, last thing on the lower body I forgot to talk about was the ankles. They have a pretty standard swivel hinge kind of ankle. It goes back, goes forward a good amount until it runs into the pants, basically, in both directions. And then there's a swivel peg that goes into the foot. And the problem with those swivel pegs sometimes is they're really steep, and that is the case here. But there's, fortunately, another swivel where the ankle meets the pants. And so that lets you just straighten it out perfectly. So that works really well too. And I know that like swivels, ankle swivel plus swivel hinge at the point where the ankle meets the foot is a very common joint now, so I'm glad they've done it that way. Now, really quickly, I also want to touch on the wrist articulation. This is one place where I did have a problem with my Feilong. One of these pegs is almost sheared off of the hinge that it's connected to. So these pegs are on a hinge, and then there's some sort of axis running through them. And so they bend like that, but they only bend one direction. Now, the breakage, I mean, it's not really down to the design of this particular joint. Marvel Legends does the same type of joints, but you'll notice, here's Cyclops' hand. Check out the difference in the thickness here. It's not a ton, but it does make a difference at this size. So even Mafex here has a different style of joint, which I do want Jada to adopt and other lines to adopt, because it provides hinging in any direction you want, similar to how the shoulder works in any direction. This is just a less limited design, but these little pegs are very notorious for breaking on Mafex figures. I think that comes down to this is the smallest joint on most action figures, and so moving part plus tiny plastic equals biggest risk for breaking. So it's something that needs extra care when designing and choosing materials, but here's what I'm talking about. So I've got this hinge horizontal, but you can swivel the hinge, and you want to be very careful when doing this. Like I said, basically always be careful articulating and swapping your hands. But then I've got vertical hinge here. So horizontal hinge, vertical hinge. Now Ryu here only has horizontal hinges, and that works for him. But sometimes it helps to have a vertical hinge. So last thing, articulation. I hope they change the headband. It's not articulated, and I think it would go a long way to put a ball peg on this and just give you the ability to do a little bit of tilt and swivel. Swivel is good enough. SHF Naruto has a hinge, which is really strange, but it lets you basically do this up and down. Swivel, the ball peg really provides like the maximum range of motion. You get some tilt from the ball, and then you get the swivel from the peg. So I think that would be a really good way to do it. I think they'll probably revisit Ryu at some point, maybe in a color variant. He'll come with alternate heads that have an articulated headband. All right. I said I wasn't going to run all the articulation, and I think I covered every single joint except the neck. They did the neck also perfectly. Ball peg at the bottom, ball peg between the neck and the head, and you get every bit of range you want. It could stand to have a little bit more range in this lower ball peg, and that would give you a little bit more up and down, especially up. But you can kind of shimmy the head back a little bit, and obviously you start to get gaps, but that gives you some more range up if you're really looking for it. Talking about shimmying the head, let's shimmy it all the way off, and there you can see the inner workings of this boy. So nice double ball peg. That is in contrast to Marvel Legends, which insists on this ridiculous fused neck and gigantic hinge disc that looks unsightly and doesn't tilt at all. Goodness, that needs to be retired. I know they've tried at least changing to double ball peg, but then you need the bottom part of the neck to be cut and pegged into the torso with the ball. Otherwise, you don't get any range. So, or you get very limited range. I mean, obviously, this is maximum limitation. This is great, but I would rather have some more of this, especially for I'm crouched over and I'm looking to the side kind of pose. He can't really do it so naturally. He can only look like skyward unless you like cheat and rotate his body, and then you do something like that. It kind of works, but it feels like it fights you a little bit, similar with their ab crunch. Anyhow, we'll get to this guy later. I've swapped the alternate head on here. I'm going to go ahead and change the hands, put his clothes back on. I find the gi is pretty easy to swap on and off. There's a little tiny peg here. Careful not to lose this. It is a loose separate piece. It does have a bit of shape to it that I'll leave to your imagination. But yeah, you just peg, and then his belt pegs over in two places. This I'm a little bit concerned about swapping it a bunch because of how thin the border, or how thin that belt is around where the hole is cut. Another point of articulation they could work on is belt. Similar to like the Figuarts Goku type of belt. I really don't love the Figuarts Goku, but that's more down to the sculpt. I think maybe a couple different belt sculpts is the way to go. I don't really know. But like a swivel here is the way they do it. And their sculpt is actually a lot less natural looking than this. This has a little bit of flow to it, which is nice. The Figuarts Goku is like a triangle, so that's also done really well. Okay, grabbing the hands here out of the tray is a little bit of a trick, just because they also do their trays similar to Marvel Legends, so that's a really fine detail that I don't know if many people have talked about, but the tray on this figure is very different from, say, Cyclops here, from the Mafex. For the Mafex, their tray is two pieces, and it has a lid. Everything, really the only like hard connection is the lid to the bottom of the tray. Once you take that lid off, if I tip this over, everything's falling out. But what that means is like stuff's really easy to get in and out of the tray without any risk of damage to it. So like I can grab this head and it's just easy. It doesn't pop in, it just sits. But it's held securely in place by the top of the tray. And that's pretty nice. If you are like me and you keep your figures mostly in the package, but like rotate them out on a display every now and then, this style of package is usable, but you do have to kind of like deform it a little bit to get the parts out, and maybe over time might lose its shape a little bit. If you do it a whole bunch, it's probably fine though. I don't know. Just something I noticed. Let's see what else. So we're gonna peg in his Hadoken hands, horizontal hinges on these. That one's going in just fine. And then we're going to set up this effect part, which is done in this really nice translucent blue, and it has a detail in it that had me revisiting the game. I did not know when in Street Fighter 2, when the Hadouken is used, you can see Ryu's hands inside the ball as it travels. It's not for posing like this and hiding like his hands behind it. You can use it like that. But what this is meant to mimic is really, when you see this in-game, it goes out of his hands and you can still see his hands in it. Now, from the side, you cannot at all. So the effect is lost a little bit unless you kind of put it at an angle. But that's a really, really beautiful touch, attention to detail, that had me go learn something new about Street Fighter. So that's really cool and thoughtful. Is it left over right or right over left? I am not sure, but the way this thing pegs in suggests to me it is right over left. So we're going to set it up that way. Here you go. You can see this sits about chest height when it's not quite fully extended. Let's get it fully extended. It is not the tightest hinges, and you can't get in there with a screw and tighten it, so you might have to work with it a little bit just to get it poised. I'm going to do my very best to balance this on my very unforgiving table. And I use a very unforgiving table on purpose because I want to show just how stable stuff is to myself and the viewer. So let me just show you. So the Hadouken, obviously, he's got to bring his hands together in front of his chest. And if you just like smush them together, it's probably not going to work if he's wearing the gi. So obviously we looked at it without the gi and it works fine. So the range is there. It's just this rubber gets in between the arm, the shoulder, and the chest and limits it a little bit. So what you got to do is you got to kind of pull it together. So I usually grab one piece, pull it into his chest, hold it with my thumb, grab the other piece, pull into his chest, then I can hold both with my thumb. And yeah, it's not effortless, but it does function enough. Just about. Let's see if I can get it a little closer. So really, I mean, his hand should be like that. They want to split just a little bit, just because I think the rubber is reforming itself and kind of pushing out on the shoulders. Okay, I think that's about as close as I can get it. You can kind of fudge the angle a little bit, and then worst case scenario, you can bend the elbows a little bit. But if you want to display Ryu like this, then I just knock him over. Okay, and then let's get him crouching a little bit. Okay, deep breath, everybody. We did it.